"You've earned this, Mom," my daughter-in-law said, setting a plate in front of me with both hands like an offering. Everyone at the table smiled. My son kissed her cheek. My grandchildren clapped. Then I looked down at my food and thought about the bottle I'd found in her bathroom drawer the week before. The one with no label. The one she hid behind the cotton balls. I thought about the way she'd volunteered to handle the food for tonight. I thought about the way she'd asked, twice, if I had any allergies. So I picked up my fork. I smiled at her. And then I turned to the waiter and said, very quietly, "Would you mind switching this plate? I think there's been a mistake." There was no mistake. And we both knew it. The restaurant was warm. The kind of warmth that comes from low lighting and too many people in a room that isn't quite big enough. There were flowers on the table, white roses, which are my favorite. And Vanessa knew that because I told her once, years ago, and she filed it away the way she filed everything away. There were balloons tied to the backs of chairs. A banner that read, "Happy Retirement, Gloria," in gold letters. My granddaughter Lily had drawn a card with a picture of me behind the pharmacy counter, holding a bottle of pills with a big smile on my face. It was the sweetest thing I'd seen in months, and I held it against my chest like armor. But my eyes kept going back to Vanessa. She sat across from me, her posture perfect, her smile precise. She watched me the way a cat watches a door, patient, focused, waiting for movement. When I asked the waiter to switch the plate, her expression did something that lasted less than a second. A flicker. A tightening around the mouth. Not shock. Not anger. Something closer to recalculation. Then the smile returned and she said, "Oh, Mom, was something wrong with it?" And I said, "No, sweetheart. I just thought I saw something I didn't order." And she nodded and looked down at her wine glass and didn't ask again. The rest of dinner moved the way these things do. Speeches. Laughter. Marcus stood up and talked about how proud he was of me, how I'd spent almost 4 decades taking care of other people's families and now it was time to let my family take care of me. Everyone clapped. I smiled. And through it all, I watched Vanessa watching me. She was looking for something, drowsiness maybe, confusion, a stumble on the way to the restroom, a slurred word, something she could point to later and say, "You know, she just hasn't been herself." But none of it came, because I hadn't eaten from her plate. By dessert, Vanessa had excused herself to the restroom 3 times. The last time she came back, her hands were shaking. I noticed because I've spent my entire adult life watching hands passing prescriptions across a counter, hands opening pill bottles, hands trembling because the diagnosis was bad and the medication was new and the fear was real. I know what steady hands look like, and I know what guilty ones look like. The evening ended with hugs and photographs. Marcus kissed my forehead. Lily gave me another drawing. Owen, my youngest grandchild, fell asleep in my arms for a few minutes and I held him close because children don't lie with their bodies. When they fall asleep on you, it means they feel safe, and I needed to feel that someone in this family still trusted me with that kind of closeness. I drove home alone. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark for 20 minutes with both hands on the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, breathing, letting the weight of what had almost happened settle into my bones. And the only thing I could think about was the bottle. This small brown bottle with no label, hidden behind cotton balls in Vanessa's bathroom drawer. I knew I needed to go back and find it. And I knew, with a certainty that sat heavy in my stomach, that it wouldn't still be there. Before I go further, I need you to understand something about me. I'm not the kind of woman who suspects people. I don't look for dark motives behind kind gestures. I spent 38 years as a pharmacist, standing behind a counter, reading labels, checking dosages, catching the interactions that doctors sometimes missed. I trust science. I trust evidence. I trust people until they give me a reason not to. If you're listening to this right now, maybe it's late where you are, maybe you're driving, maybe you're folding laundry. I just want to say thank you for being here. This story changed my life, and sharing it still isn't easy. If it means something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button or subscribe, because these stories matter, and I think you already feel that. My daughter-in-law gave me a reason not to trust her. And I want to tell you how we got here, because the retirement party wasn't the beginning. It was almost the end. My name is Gloria. I'm 67 years old. I worked at the same community pharmacy for 38 years, Henderson's, on the corner of Maple and 3rd, in a mid-sized town that I loved because it was small enough to know people's names and big enough to mind your business when it mattered. I wasn't the owner, but I might as well have been. I was the one people asked for. I was the one who remembered that Mrs. Calloway couldn't swallow large capsules and that Mr. Brandt's blood pressure medication needed to be taken with food and that the Ongwing family's youngest was allergic to a red dye that showed up in more medications than you'd think. I caught errors. I counseled patients who were scared. I worked holidays. I worked weekends. I stood behind the counter through 2 hurricanes, a pandemic, and 100 small-town emergencies that nobody ever wrote about. I married young. My husband David was an electrician, a quiet man with rough hands and a gentle voice. He built things. He fixed things. He never once raised his voice at me in 41 years of marriage. We raised 2 children. Marcus, our older, and Elaine, our younger, who lives out of state now. David died of pancreatic cancer 11 years ago. By the end, he was so thin I could lift him myself. I cared for him at home for the final 4 months. I administered his medication. I bathed him. I slept in a chair beside his hospital bed because he said he could rest better when he heard me breathing. The morning he died, I was holding his hand and checking his pulse at the same time, because even in grief, my training never turned off. After David passed, I poured myself back into work. I paid off the house. I helped Marcus with a down payment on his first home. I set aside money in a trust for my grandchildren's education. I never asked for recognition. I never asked for anything back. I believed that family was built on loyalty, not ledgers. I am a woman who shows love by showing up. That's all I've ever known how to do. Marcus met Vanessa about 6 years ago. She was younger than him by 5 years, attractive, well-spoken, with a confidence that filled a room before she even sat down. And at first, I thought she was an answer to prayer. I thought my son had found someone who would take care of him the way I always had. I was wrong about what she wanted to take care of. The early years were warm. Vanessa was charming in a way that felt effortless, though I understand now that nothing about her was effortless. Everything was engineered. She remembered my birthday. She brought me flowers. She started calling me Mom from the 2nd year onward, and I let her because it felt like welcome and I wanted so badly to believe it was real. When Marcus and Vanessa got married, I paid for a significant portion of the wedding. Nobody asked me to. Vanessa had mentioned once, casually, that her own family couldn't contribute much, and she'd said it with just enough sadness in her voice that I offered before the sentence was finished. I didn't mind. I wanted my son's wedding to be beautiful, and it was. When Lily was born, I took 2 weeks off work to help. When Owen came, I did the same. I babysat weekly. I made freezer meals, lasagnas, casseroles, soups labeled with reheating instructions because that's who I am. I drove the children to school when Vanessa had migraines. I gave Marcus and Vanessa $20,000 toward a larger house when Vanessa said the apartment was too small for 2 kids. I gave all of this freely, openly, out of love. But I will tell you one thing I noticed, even then. Vanessa never said thank you the way someone says it when they're grateful. She said it the way someone says it when they're keeping count. Things began to shift about 2 years ago. I remember the exact moment. We were having dinner at their house, pot roast, Vanessa's recipe, and I mentioned casually that I was thinking about updating my will. It wasn't a dramatic statement. I said something like, I should probably sit down with Patricia and make sure everything's current. Normal talk for a woman my age. But the way Vanessa looked at Marcus across the table, her fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes flicking to him and then back to her plate, it was like a signal. Like something had just been activated. After that dinner, the questions started. Not all at once. Vanessa was too careful for that. But over the next several months, she began asking about my finances in ways that felt too precise. Not, how are you doing, Mom? But do you still have that savings account at First National? And did David's pension transfer directly to you? Or is it held somewhere? Marcus began suggesting I should simplify my life. Maybe sell the house. Maybe move into a smaller condo. Maybe let him help manage my accounts. He said it gently, the way you'd suggest something to someone you thought was fragile. And that's what hurt. Not the suggestion, but the tone. As if I had already started declining and just hadn't noticed yet. I noticed Vanessa volunteering to pick up my mail. One afternoon, I found an opened envelope in the back seat of her car when she was driving me home from a doctor's appointment, a bank statement addressed to me. I held it up and said, "Vanessa, this is mine." She glanced in the rearview mirror and laughed. Oh my gosh, it must have gotten mixed in with ours. "I'm so sorry." She didn't look sorry. She looked caught. My weekly dinners at their house began to feel different. Vanessa started correcting me in front of the grandchildren. Small things. How I seasoned the chicken. How I folded the dish towels. How I spoke to Lily about her homework. "Mom, we don't do it that way anymore," she'd say with a little smile, and Marcus would just look at his plate. I was being repositioned. I could feel it. Not pushed out of the family, not yet, but moved from the head of the table to the corner. From matriarch to obligation. One evening, Vanessa leaned across the kitchen counter and said, "You know, Mom, when the time comes, we should really talk about power of attorney. Just to be safe." I looked at her and said, "Safe from what?" She smiled that perfect practice smile and said, "You know, life." I went home that night and started a notebook. A small black one, the kind I used to use for inventory at the pharmacy. I wrote down dates, comments, questions she'd asked, looks she'd exchanged with Marcus. I didn't know what I was building. I just knew my pharmacist brain wouldn't stop cataloging the patterns. Something in me understood I'd need it. Then came my birthday. I arrived at Marcus and Vanessa's house expecting a small family dinner. Instead, Vanessa had invited several of her own friends, women I'd never met. During dinner, she told a story about how I'd accidentally given Lily an expired cough syrup last winter. The table went quiet. Her friends laughed uncomfortably. I sat very still because I knew with every fiber of my professional being that it had never happened. I have never, in 38 years, dispensed or administered an expired medication. Not once. Not to a patient. Not to a stranger. And certainly not to my own granddaughter. It was a lie. A small, surgical lie designed to plant a seed in the minds of witnesses. Gloria is slipping. Marcus looked at the table. He didn't correct her. 3 weeks later, I stopped by their house unannounced to drop off books for the kids. The front door was unlocked, so I stepped inside. And from the hallway, I heard Vanessa on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was low but clear. She said, "It won't be long now. Once she retires, she'll have no reason to keep all of it. We just need to make sure she signs before she starts getting forgetful." I stood in that hallway holding a bag of children's books and felt my chest go cold. Not hot. Not angry. Cold. The kind of cold that tells you something has fundamentally changed and can never go back to what it was. I left the books on the porch and drove home without knocking. That night I sat at my kitchen table and opened the notebook. I read every entry. And for the first time, I didn't see scattered notes. I saw a plan. Her plan. And I realized I needed one of my own. 2 weeks before the retirement party, I went to their house to babysit. After the kids were asleep, I used the bathroom. Vanessa's drawer was slightly open. Behind the cotton balls in a makeup bag, I found it, a small brown bottle with no label. No pharmacy sticker. No dosage instructions. No prescriber. No lot number. Nothing. It was half full of a clear liquid. I picked it up and held it to the light. In 38 years behind a pharmacy counter, I have never seen a legitimate medication with no label. Compounded prescriptions come with documentation. Over-the-counter supplements have packaging. Even essential oils have branding. This had nothing. This was hidden on purpose. I photographed the bottle with my phone, front, back, the cap, the volume line. I put it back exactly as I found it and closed the drawer. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and connected every thread. The financial questions. The will conversation. The opened mail. The power of attorney pressure. The phone call about signing before she gets forgetful. And now, a bottle with no name, hidden where no one would look. I thought about Vanessa asking me about allergies the week before. I just want to make sure we don't serve anything that would upset your stomach at the party, Mom. I whispered to the ceiling, she's not planning a party. She's planning something else. The next morning I called Raymond Ellis. Raymond is a retired pharmaceutical chemist I worked alongside for 15 years. I trust him the way I trust my own hands. I described the bottle, the size, the color of the liquid, the lack of any labeling. He asked careful questions: viscosity, smell through the cap, approximate volume. Then he gave me several possibilities, ranging from benign, an herbal tincture, an essential oil concentrate, to deeply concerning. A concentrated herbal laxative compound. A mild sedative. Something designed to cause gastrointestinal distress and disorientation that could mimic sudden cognitive decline. Then Raymond said something I wrote down word for word. If someone hid it and it has no label, then they don't want anyone to know what it is. That's not medicine, Gloria. That's intent. In the days before the party, Vanessa became unusually attentive. She called me daily. She asked about my health, my sleep, my appetite. She asked again about allergies, specifically anything that makes you feel faint or dizzy. I answered calmly each time. I gave nothing away. I watched. I listened. I wrote everything down. 3 days before the dinner, Vanessa called and said, "I have a surprise for you at the party. Something really special. You're going to feel so loved." I hung up the phone, opened the notebook, and wrote one word: tonight. But I had one more stop to make first. I visited my attorney, Patricia Chen, a woman I've known for over a decade. I didn't lead with the bottle. I started with the financial pattern, the open mail, the power of attorney pressure, the overheard phone call. Patricia listened without interrupting. Then she pulled up my legal files and told me something I didn't know. Someone, using Marcus's name, had called her office 3 months earlier, asking about the process for contesting a will on the grounds of diminished mental capacity. Patricia's assistant had taken the call and made a note, but hadn't flagged it because no formal action was pursued. I sat in that leather chair and felt the floor tilt beneath me. My own son. Calling to ask how to declare me incompetent. Patricia advised me to act immediately. We updated my healthcare directive, removing Marcus as medical proxy and replacing him with Elaine. We added a no contest clause to the will, meaning that if Marcus challenged it, he would forfeit his inheritance entirely. We restructured my accounts to require dual authorization for any significant withdrawal. And I told Patricia about the bottle. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Gloria, if you believe someone is trying to make you ill, even to simulate confusion or incapacity, that's not a family dispute. That's a crime." I told her I wasn't ready for police. Not yet. I wanted to see what happened at the dinner first. On my way out, I called Raymond one more time. I asked him a very specific question. If someone put something in food, something designed to make a 67-year-old woman seem confused and mentally unfit, what would you look for? He told me. And then he said 2 words that changed everything. Save the plate. So I did. At the retirement dinner, after I asked the waiter to switch my plate, I also asked him, very quietly, very politely, to wrap the original plate in a to-go container and set it aside for me. I told him I wanted to bring leftovers home. He smiled and said, of course. He had no idea what he was holding. I pieced together the full picture in the hours after that dinner. The plan was layered and patient, which is what made it so dangerous. Vanessa and Marcus intended to use my retirement as the starting point of a narrative. Once I was no longer working, they would frame me as aging, declining, forgetting. The power of attorney was step 1, legal control over my finances. The call about diminished capacity was step 2, laying groundwork to challenge the will. And the bottle was step 3. If I became visibly confused, disoriented, or ill at my own retirement party in front of dozens of colleagues and friends, it would serve as public evidence that I was no longer competent. Vanessa could then push for medical proxy, financial control, and eventually access to my house, my savings, and my grandchildren's trust fund. But what Vanessa didn't know, what neither she nor Marcus understood, was the power I still held. The house was paid off and in my name alone, with a transfer on death deed to Elaine filed years ago. The savings accounts now required dual authorization. The will contained a no contest clause. The healthcare directive named Elaine. And in my purse sat a notebook filled with dates, quotes, and photographs, along with a to-go container that held the evidence of what she tried to feed me. I was not a helpless old woman being managed into a corner. I was a pharmacist. I had spent my entire career making sure people received the right dose. I was not going to receive the wrong one. Raymond tested the food from the original plate. He found a concentrated herbal compound, not lethal, but engineered to cause drowsiness, gastrointestinal distress, and temporary confusion. In a 67-year-old woman at a public event, it would have looked exactly like the beginning of cognitive decline. Exactly like what they needed people to see. Elaine flew home 2 days after I called her. I showed her everything. The notebook, the photographs, the legal documents, Raymond's report. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat at my kitchen table and read every page, and when she was finished, she looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to sit at my own table and tell the truth." Sunday. My house. My kitchen. My table. Marcus and Vanessa arrived at noon. Elaine was already seated. Patricia Chen was on speakerphone. Vanessa walked in smiling. She stopped smiling when she saw Elaine. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I spoke the way I've always spoken, clearly, carefully, the way you speak when the dosage matters and there's no room for error. I told Marcus I knew about the call to Patricia's office. I told Vanessa I found the bottle. I showed them the photograph. I told them the original plate from the retirement dinner had been tested, and I read Raymond's findings aloud, the compound, the concentration, the expected effects. The room became very still. Vanessa opened her mouth. I raised one hand, not in anger, but in the quiet authority of a woman who has spent her life being precise, and I said, "I am not asking you to explain. I am telling you what I know." Patricia outlined the legal reality from the speakerphone. The will was updated. The no contest clause was active. The house transfer was filed. All accounts were secured. If any further action, legal, medical, or financial, was taken against me, the full documentation would be forwarded to law enforcement. Marcus broke. He put his face in his hands and cried. He said he didn't know what was in the bottle. He said Vanessa told him it was a natural supplement to help me relax. He said he never meant for any of this. I looked at my son, the boy I raised, the man I helped buy a home, the father of my grandchildren. And I said quietly, "You didn't ask." That's the part that breaks my heart. Vanessa said nothing. She picked up her purse and walked out the front door. She didn't slam it. She just left. And somehow, her silence was louder than anything she could have said. Marcus stayed for a few more minutes, crying at the table. I didn't comfort him. Not yet. Not because I'm cruel, but because some silences need to be sat in. Some consequences need to be felt before forgiveness can even begin to be discussed. I told him he could stay for lunch if he wanted. He shook his head and left. Elaine reached across the table and held my hand. We sat like that for a long time, in the kitchen that David built the shelves in, at the table where I'd fed my children 10,000 meals, in the house that was mine and had always been mine and would remain mine until I decided otherwise. In the weeks that followed, Marcus and Vanessa separated. He moved into a small apartment across town. He calls me once a week now. The conversations are short and careful, like walking on ice that hasn't frozen all the way through. He hasn't apologized. Not really. Not in the way that changes something. But he has stopped defending Vanessa, and I suppose that's where rebuilding begins, not with words, but with the absence of the wrong ones. Elaine helped me install a camera at the front door and change the locks. I still see my grandchildren. Vanessa doesn't fight it, perhaps because she understands what I hold. I filed a formal report with the police, not to press charges yet, but to create a record. The detective I spoke with looked at my notebook, my photographs, Raymond's analysis, Patricia's documents, and said, "Ma'am, you're the most prepared witness I've ever met." I told him I was a pharmacist. Being prepared is what we do. I went back to Henderson's one last time. Not to work. To say goodbye. My colleagues lined up behind the counter I'd stood behind for 38 years, and gave me a standing ovation. I held Lily's drawing against my chest and cried for the first time in months. That was my real retirement. That was the moment I earned. At home, I put the notebook in a locked drawer. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it away. I keep it where I keep important things, close, organized, and ready if needed. I want to say one more thing to anyone still listening. My daughter-in-law looked at me and saw a woman slowing down. She saw someone she could manage. She saw a plate she could poison and a life she could rearrange. But she forgot one thing. I spent 38 years standing behind a counter, catching the mistakes that could kill people. I caught hers too. If someone in your life is making you feel small, confused, or crazy, trust yourself. Write it down. Keep the evidence. And never, ever let anyone tell you that your instincts are just age. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw a plate. I didn't scream. I just switched my plate with the waiters. Sometimes the quietest move is the one that saves your life.